Thank you for joining us this evening on our Head First Honor Roll Camps webinar, talking about 7 common recruiting mistakes and how families and student athletes can avoid them. Before we go into the meat of the evening, I just want to give some quick introduction to who you'll be talking to or hearing from this evening. You'll be hearing from myself, Max McKenna. I graduated from Amherst College in 2011, where I played baseball, and also Matt Sternberg, who graduated from George Washington University in 2007, was recruited for college lacrosse, started his own business for a while, and now has joined us. And between the two of us, we have really worked for 5 years or so now at Head First, helping student athletes that come to our camps and those that don't through the high academic recruitment process. And we love to share some of the insights and guidance on that. First up is talking through what we mean by high academic recruiting. Matt?
Appreciate that, Max. So it's a pretty loaded word there, right? High academic recruiting. I think there's a lot of folks that come into this and have their own kind of ideas of what this is, and we like to give folks the opportunity to really learn from, a company like Head First, who have been doing this for 21 years and kind of our version of that. So, for us, it's pursuing the side-by-side goals of being able to play softball, at the highest level, but at the same time, using softball as a vehicle, to help get you into a school that is going to be a reach, that's going to be a stretch, because they're really, really tough schools. So making sure that you're finding the perfect academic fit and playing softball at your highest level is how we see this. Because of the fact that there are so many different schools out there that are high academic that kind of fit this. Some are, many are different than others. What we're trying to do is help you guys determine what is it that I can do to really set the landscape to achieve and get into some of these schools to start to build your list. So we're going to talk a lot about this later, and it's really, really important though to begin with this blueprint, so you're able to kind of move forward. And the last part of this is, as I said, for some of these examples, you're going to hear a lot throughout this conversation, this webinar here. Division I versus Division III, campus setting, the size of the school, the ranking, the areas of academic study. These are all things that'll go into a high academic school. And that last part is for those folks that are enrolled in our camps, for those folks that are thinking about enrolling in our camps, we give you the tools to be able to walk away and say, here are the things that I can do to make sure that I'm building my list properly and trying to achieve those again after that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. And that really brings us into a quick agenda for the evening that shows kind of the big buckets that we look at when we think about these 7 common recruiting mistakes. You see there, the first one up is building a college list. We see student athletes start to make some mistakes in the recruiting process, quite frankly, very early on. And there are 2 things that we think about, 2 kind of subcategories that we think about in list building. The first is thinking of schools versus qualities of schools. So when we think about a list of schools, a very natural place to start is by listing colleges, listing schools. But we would argue that that is actually, that's the first mistake that you can make in the college recruiting process, is thinking about a list of schools as just that, a list of names of schools. Really what finding the right holistic fit is, and as Matt mentioned, it's a key outcome of the high academic recruiting process. Finding the right fit is about finding the school that matches what you are looking for as a student athlete across multiple different dimensions and aspects of the school. It's not just the name, right? It's the academic piece of the school, it's the geography, it's the setting, it's the size, it's all these things you see here listed on your screen. And even within that, there are kind of sub-questions as well. When it comes to academics, one thing to think about is, does the school offer the area of academic study that I'm thinking about, and is it a relative strength of that school? If you have your heart set on majoring in the humanities, MIT or Caltech, they're both great schools, but if you're majoring in the humanities, it might not be the right fit for you because it offers a very different strength. Obvious strength in the STEM fields, not necessarily known for their humanities, still offer great education, but it's not a relative strength of that school. So when you're thinking about the academic piece of that holistic fit, that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing, geography. And one sub question here that I always point to is, how far Do you want to be from where you grew up, from where your parents are? Do you want them to be right down the road, coming to every single one of your softball games? Or do you want to be on the other side of the country? Or do you want to be somewhere in between? And it's really going to vary for different student athletes in what they are looking for in their college experience. Then there's things like setting. Do you want to be on a campus that is like GW, where Matt went, or like NYU, that is in the heart of a city? Or do you want to be at a school like Amherst, where I went, that is not in the middle of a city? It's near a smaller town, but it's very much a, at best, suburban, possibly rural campus, and that makes for a very different college experience. And then even within that, if you've decided that you want to be on an urban campus, NYU and Johns Hopkins, NYU and GW, or Tufts or Harvard offer urban experiences for college, but Boston as a city is very different than New York, is very different than Baltimore or Washington, D.C. And so the characters of the city, what size the city is, offer very different experiences for that campus as well. Size, and I think sometimes ignored within size, because I think that this is one that people look at. They look at the overall size of a school. But what's the breakdown between undergrads and graduate students? What is the average class size? What are the different component parts that size plays into? How hard is it, or how relatively easy is it to get the right academic and administrative support? As simple as, what does registering for classes look like? How different is it at a GW or an NYU as opposed to an Amherst or a Bates? What is the difference in that, and how does that size impact the different pieces of the administrative and the academic experience as well? And then obviously you see here certainly athletics and the social aspect as well. And one under-recognized piece that I would point to in athletics is, you know, certainly everybody thinks about the Division I versus Division III, and we'll touch on that in more detail later on. But also, what role does the softball program play within that athletics department? Is it a football-focused school that has a softball team, or has a volleyball team, or has these other parts? Or is softball really a focus of that athletic department? It's not good or bad or the other, one way or the other, but it does change the character of that program and how the coach approaches that program and how student athletes approach that program as well. The other thing about this is, even if you go through it, and this is just a sample of, you know, 6 or so characteristics that can make up a school, there are more, first of all, and also different student athletes are going to weight different pieces of these dimensions differently. It might be that academics is your first and foremost, and whether you go to school right down the street from mom and dad or across the country is less of an issue for you. So as you think through this, it's not just about setting these different bars for yourself, but also how do you weight these different categories? And then the second piece, and we'll touch on this again later too, is keeping an open mind. You know, the schools that don't necessarily hit all 6 of these, but offer a really good fit in one or the other, how do you weigh those in to your college list building experiences as well?
And I think that can be very difficult when we're asking a 15, 16, 17-year-old who's going through this to keep that open mind. And that's where I think we as, you know, advisors, you know, as parents, of course, can offer some tips, and where folks like, you know, head first staff, which we'll talk about, that have gone through this process, they can really say, I get it, this is out of my comfort zone, this is where we can really help and guide you in that right direction to do it, and give mom and dad some good tips as well.
Oh, mom and dad, you're going to play a key role in this. And this brings us, Matt, it's a great segue into the next thing that we're kind of talking about, which is, okay, great. You've said that starting by listing schools, as you know, counterintuitive as it seems, starting by listing schools is the first trap of building a school list. So how do I go about finding this list of qualities? And there's a couple tricks that I advise families to use here. And really, finding this list of qualities is about balancing 2 things, which you see here: visit college campuses and record your impressions of these college campuses. Now, the thing on here that you see that's counterintuitive is start with schools that you know you're not interested in. This seems weird, right? You know, why waste the time of going to visit schools that you're not interested in? What I advise is find a couple of schools that you know you are not interested in. For me, it would have been schools that are too close to home, right? I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts. I know that I'm not going to Tufts, Harvard, or MIT because they're too close to home. Great. Those are the first 3 schools that I should tour. Why? So that I can get a list of these qualities. I can start to build an impression of these qualities. What does a 6,500 person school look like when I go visit Harvard? What does an urban campus look like when I go visit MIT? What does a school just outside a city look like when I go visit Tufts? And start to separate these qualities from the stars that I might have in my eyes about these programs. If I have dreamed of going to NYU my entire life, as soon as I step foot on that campus, I'm not going to be thinking, is an urban campus the right fit for me? I'm going to be thinking, oh my God, this is NYU. This is what I've dreamed of. And so being able to separate out the qualities of a school from the name of the school, I think is so, so key to start building this list. Also key to this is finding a quality at each of these schools that you visit that you really like. If you know that you don't want to go to Caltech because it's an engineering school, but you like, you know what, I really like the access that undergraduates have to graduate level teaching faculty. Great, that's a really good thing to be able to take away and say, that is something that I appreciated about this school. Or I'm sitting in an info session and the class size was this, and that sounded like a perfect fit for me. Find one quality at each of these that you think resonates with you, and you can start to build your list from these schools that you know you're not interested in before you start to place this list up against the schools that you might be interested in. Also key to this, and this is that second bullet, is start a journal for your campus visits and write down your impressions of these schools. Write down your initial thoughts from the tour and from the info sessions, and then mom and dad, this is where you play a key and crucial role. Ask questions. Don't just settle for what I personally would have done as a student athlete, which is to say, hey Max, did you like campus? It was fine. That's not going to get you any further down the list of finding the right school for you. But if you're able to develop a curriculum of questions as you're leaving campus, you say, okay Max, what was one thing you liked about that campus? What was one thing you liked about this info session? What do you think about the size of X? What do you think about the tour guide? What do you think about the majors and the academic focus that they talked about on the tour? Develop this list of questions to really probe, and then write down all of these things so you don't try to think back and remember months later and say, you know what, I think I did like NYU, but I don't remember why. I don't remember what it was that stood out to me about it.
Last, to kind of hit on what you first started out with, this all can get very, very expensive, right? From camps to showcases to tournaments to all these different things, to going to different visits and seeing all this. So the key is, for a lot of folks, they can do this right in their backyard within 100 miles. They can go, even if you're not interested. You said you wanted to go far away from home. You went to Amherst. I thought you would expect that you were going to go look at Pomona. That's another story. But I do think that's what's key, is finding those 2 or 3 schools that are very different, that are in driving distance of your house, to be able to go and do some of these exercises.
Absolutely. Another hack that I always advise families to take advantage of too is, look, over the summer, if you're playing travel softball, you're going to be traveling a lot. Use those trips, right? If you're down in North Carolina for a travel tournament, or you're in Oregon for a travel tournament, find out what some of the local schools are, and start to and go on a campus tour. Have that day off, take that extra day, extend the trip by a day when you're at Head First in Chino Hills, and say, I'm going to go give Pomona a tour. I'm close enough. I'm coming from the Midwest. I'm coming from the East Coast. I'm not going to be out here again. Let me get a tour of these colleges and really gain some efficiency in not just the exposure, which we'll talk about, and the recruiting side of it, but also in your holistic college process as well. Another trap that we see a lot of student athletes fall into is labels. And Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the labels that we see?
I would love to. I would say the majority of things that I discuss, whether it's on the phones with families or hear from our folks here, are just those very labels. The problem with these labels, which we'll give you a couple of examples of, is they really close you off to the majority of schools, specifically a lot of those high academic schools that you may not know too much about. And so, for example, right, I want to go to an Ivy League school. I think that's a nice thing to say. But Ivy League schools from one another are very, very different from where they are, from Dartmouth to Harvard to Brown to Yale, those types of schools. They're very, very different from each other, from some of the things that they're going to offer in terms of their major, and certainly their geography and their size. So I think being able to say, I like this school because, and then being able to use some of those characteristics to then place in an Ivy League school are fantastic, because that's a very good, good opportunity to be able to do that. The second one, which I actually think is the biggest one, is I want to play Division I. That's point blank. That's it. Again, what we've talked about here is less than 1/3 of NCAA schools are Division I, and even less than that are some of the higher academic schools that we've talked about. we need to kind of get rid of the it's D1 or bust, stigma. It's let's find the best fit for us. That the major is right. I keep kind of bringing it up, but I think that's important. But then other things, right? Like you talk about, what's the social kind of situation like? What is the deal with clubs on campus? Do they offer, a really good, like I know GW, for example, their intern program was amazing. And in the summertime, being able to do that day in and day out and have a real job was important. If you're going to play in a specific school and kind of division, you need to find out what their summer schedules are like. So I think that's what's really, really important is to cut through some of these labels and make it what's right for you. All right, you want to go to the next slide there? That's perfect. So then, I think that overall, assessing the schools with your list of qualities, the ones that you've kind of mentioned and given some tips on, is going to really help determine your college experience and more importantly, where you're going to go to study what you actually want to go study. So the way that we define the win in the recruiting process is probably very different than a lot of other folks, camps, however you want to say it. We honestly feel that, and I said this before, that using softball as that vehicle to help gain admission to a school with a very low acceptance rate, that's the win. Because you're not just looking at the next 4 years, you are looking, and again, tough for a 16, 15, 17-year-old to think about, you're looking at the next 60 years. How is this going to shape me? Where am I going to live? Where am I going to study? Who am I going to meet when it comes to that? And then the last part is keep an open mind. You said it earlier, we have to say it again, because in this recruiting process, what you're going to find, especially with the higher academic schools, is there's going to be schools out there that you don't know too much about. You didn't even know maybe that they existed, but you met them at an event, you went to their camp, more importantly, you met them at our camp, which we'll talk about, and you were able to have a great conversation with a coach from school in Minnesota, and you didn't think in a million years that's where you'd be going, but you realized that it's the perfect size school. They offer what you want to study. They have an amazing softball program where maybe you can go and play there your freshman year, which is also important. All these things connect. You go to campus, fall in love, and next thing you know, you'll be heading there. And at head first, the amount of times I have heard that from folks that are now have just been accepted or applied early or applied regular decision that are going to be going there in the fall is amazing. And we'll get to some of those stats later, but keep that open mind because you never know what doors are going to open up for you.
Absolutely. And I think that when people ask me, Max, what's your favorite part about honor roll camps, it's the idea that it's also a discovery platform for these schools. You might go into camp, and this would have been me as a student athlete. You go into camp thinking about the Northeast schools that you have heard of. You might have, Bates, Bowdoin, Colby, Amherst, Williams on your list. Great. Then all of a sudden, you meet a coach from Grinnell, Iowa, and you couldn't have put Iowa on a map. You had no idea where Grinnell was. You never heard of the school. But as you match it up against this, as you're assessing through this list of qualities, it fits so many of the qualities. And it's able to really compound your opportunities because you are looking not just at X or Y list of schools or X or Y label, but this list of qualities that you're assessing these schools through. And that's the lens that you're using.
And it's tough to do. It's really, really tough to do. So that's why we're here. That's why I hope.
So great, you've built your college list. Now the next kind of series of mistakes that we see student athletes start to make is in gaining effective recruiting exposure. And this first one is a really important one, but it's this idea of they'll find me, right? College coaches will find me. There's this long-running perception in sports recruiting and college recruiting that if I'm a good player, college coaches will find me through X or Y, through a tournament that I'm going to, or through my travel team, or whatever the case may be. Because of the volume of applicants, of recruiting, of tournaments, of everybody who is hoping to accomplish this goal of playing softball at the college level, this just isn't true anymore for the vast majority of student athletes. For student athletes with a rare and special talent, you know what? Yep, they
will be found.
they can be found. If you are a Jenny Finch level talent, you won't be able to hide it, and you will get on somebody's recruiting radar and you'll be found. But for the vast majority of student athletes, and especially those pursuing high academic recruiting, this just isn't the reality. And part of this is because of some of these other formats for recruiting and for gaining exposure, one of which is large format tournaments. These tournaments offer incredible travel ball experiences. Some of the best memories in my life have come from large format tournaments with my travel team. But from a recruiting standpoint, there isn't necessarily the same level of focus or concentrated guaranteed opportunity for student athletes. First of all, at some of these bigger tournaments, coaches are looking to cover a geographic spread of 20, 30, 50 fields that are sometimes an hour or more apart from each other, which just isn't a reality. They can't be two places at once. They might show up to camp with a list of players that they know they need to go see. They're going to see those players. They might accidentally see some of the other girls on their team, but they are not guaranteed to see every player there. And that's just a reality of the geography and the fields that these tournaments are using and everything else. The other thing is this idea of game-only opportunities and also a limited window, and these two kind of go together. We have a coworker here who went on to play at Georgetown, had a fantastic career there. She went to a large format tournament. She got in at bat. Princeton, Georgetown, GW, Haverford are all watching her, and they saw one at bat, and she struck out. She walked back to the dugout, said, well, I guess that's it for my recruiting. Now, things ended well for her, fortunately, and she got kind of this more continued opportunity through a host of other factors. But this limited exposure and this idea that there's a very limited chance that coaches see you during the right time. They might see you for one at bat, and you hit that bomb over the left field fence, and that's awesome. They also might see that strikeout. And since softball is a game of failure, if you go 4 for 10, you're in the College Hall of Fame. That's an awesome career. But those other 6 times, you're not on base. So the chances are, if a coach sees you one time, it's not necessarily the outcome that you are looking for that might help advance your recruiting. And that, I think, is a tough reality for some of these for some of these tournaments. Then there's also the smaller, more intimate regional tournaments, and these offer some great exposure opportunities to some of these regional schools where it's a smaller format. They're not spread across the same geographic area. There's a concentration of schools. But the reality of college softball recruiting budgets is that they can't go to all of the tournaments that they would like to. They would like to be out recruiting all of these high school and travel ball games and tournaments and everything else, but their recruiting budgets are such that they just aren't able to pursue all of these opportunities. And so these smaller regional tournaments that don't offer the scale and the efficiency of being able to recruit, 100, 200 girls all at once, don't necessarily draw the same national footprint of college coaches especially of these high academic schools. And then the other part is coaches now more than ever are recruiting character in addition to on-field play. Yes, impressing a coach with how hard you hit a ball, how fast you pitch, your drop, your curve, your rise, all super, super important, but so is character. And them getting to not just see you play, but interact with you, talk to you face to face, get to know you as a player is absolutely crucial because they want a girl in their program that can not just hit the ball, but can represent their program on campus to their opponents and just across, as an alumni, just across the board, represent the culture and character of the team that they are recruiting. And this is so, so important.
Another thing to that point, I'll give you an example at camp is we had a player come, and I know you know exactly what I'm talking about, who came to multiple camps. Talented kid from a very small town in the Midwest, wasn't getting the necessary opportunities, had a dream of playing Division I, really smart kid, needed as many opportunities as possible, worked harder than anybody I've ever met, and is now playing in the Big East. Really, really cool to see. When she first came to camp, it was like, there's no way this kid has an opportunity. But because everybody knew who she was, she really built that character, she really had that opportunity to show off the field, I will work harder than anybody else. Those were advantages because a lot of kids that we see are not the big time D1, SEC, oh wow, that kid in 8th grade, she should be committed by now. That's not who we're really working with. And so I think that's what's important. The last point is Head First does a really good job of complementing the travel ball scene. That's why we work with so many travel ball teams where they say, hey, you 4 kids, you 6 kids that are eligible for these types of schools or could be eligible, go to Head First after this tournament or whatever that may be, because you're going to get the type of exposure to really take you to the next step there.
Absolutely, and we'll talk a little bit about this in terms of vetting the right exposure opportunities, but your process, and Matt touched on this a little bit earlier, your process as a high academic student athlete is going to look different just by virtue of the schools that you're targeting. It's going to look very different from the vast majority of your teammates. And so you are going to require different types of opportunities to find efficiency in your process as well. Great, so how do I avoid the they'll find me trap? And the key word in avoiding this is being proactive. The they'll find me trap is one of reactivity, right? You sit back, you trust that things will work out, you kind of figure that the fates will have their day and you'll be found, right? Passive voice, there's no action behind it. To avoid that, you got to be proactive. You have to go out and attack this process, starting with your list. Build it early. Vet the qualities that you see. You think you want a small school, you go visit a small school, you say, well, maybe not that small. You know, start to kind of pressure test your list and build this list early so you can start to target these types of opportunities. The other thing is identify and pursue individual showcases that get you in front of these schools and the schools that look like the schools you are targeting. As Matt said, crucial to keep an open mind. And then last point, you have to be proactive and persistent in your communication with college coaches. And we'll talk specifically about coach communication in a little bit, but to emphasize here, you have to be proactive in finding your schools, getting the right exposure to them, and then communicating with these college coaches. You have to be proactive.
And for some of the kids that are coming on board here that are new to this process or still just don't know exactly what I want to study, that's okay too. And I think it's about opening up the umbrella, that discovery phase of going and speaking with schools, being able to, and we'll help you with that again, coming up with questions to ask coaches, such as, where do the majority of kids on your team study? That's a good one to be able to figure out kind of where kids are going, but being able to go to events like ours, where you do have the opportunities for a ton of reps, but more importantly, the opportunity to interact with schools is really, really important.
And the next step, the next mistake that we see a lot of student athletes and families make in kind of getting the right recruiting exposure is showcasing for showcase's sake, indiscriminate showcasing rather than finding the right opportunities. Matt?
Sure. So I still love the they'll find me. That's always a good thing. And again, what we're trying to do here is limit a lot of that to give you the tools and the tips to be able to combat that. So, you know, to deliver results to high academic softball players, right? You have to find the right opportunities because there is limited time in the summer. There's limited time in the fall. We're asking these kids to go take 4 AP classes to make sure that they're getting amazing grades, amazing, boards, but also at the same time perform at a level. So between mom and dad who are working, between these kids, we want to make sure that they are really taking the time to go to the right things. So I want to start off with the opportunities for college coaches to assess and evaluate you, and do it in multiple contexts and situations. Max talked about if you're just in gameplay, that doesn't necessarily always help a college coach. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're spreading that out to showcasing, to games, to objective measurements, to a practice, which we will talk about in our events in a little bit. But, tournaments are fantastic. You play travel, you can understand on the baseball side, all you wanted to do was win. Your coach was going to go ahead and, if you were throwing type of way and you didn't throw particularly well to lefties, which, I'm sure you did, then they may take you out and put a lefty in. Well, you don't want to be in that situation all the time. You want to be able to say, let me go after somebody so I can show you that I can do that. And in a tournament, that's not necessarily always going to be the case. The next bullet point here is direct engagement and interaction with college coaches, specifically, certainly on the field, but also off the field. And we find that that is really, really important because, as you said, they are really looking to recruit character. They're really looking to recruit you as a player, and it's the combination that's going to get it done. And sometimes on those particular scenes, that's in travel ball, that's not going to always get you there. Next one there, we have objective measurements and measurables. That's key, right? You want to be able to stack up against other kids that are in the same realm as you, so coaches can be able to go back and have something there on paper. The next one here, verified game footage. we will talk about that at our events, but a coach being able to go back, roll the tape, not necessarily by mom and dad, who are fantastic out there behind the chain link with their cell phones, but being able to do this as a hitter from 2 different angles and as a pitcher from 2 different angles, every single pitch being out there so you can control who's going against each other. So that way I know that if I'm going up against Max, they know that Max is a really, really good pitcher, and I hit a double right in the gap. Or that Max struck me out, and I'm a really good hitter. Those are really, really important things. And then the first one here I wanted to loop back on because I feel it's really important is making sure you're going to an event that is going to provide you the right type of exposure to the right college programs. That's the key. Don't waste your time with maybe something really small that's not the right fit, or a variety of programs that have nothing to do with what you want to study. Absolutely.
And just to tag in briefly, I think that what this is about, especially for academic student athletes, has to be about efficient process, right? You, mom and dad, you don't have the budget, players, you don't have the time to be going all over the country to this or that individual college camp to go to 15 or 20 of those or anything else. So getting in front of the right group of college coaches at the right time all at once is about delivering efficiency for high academic student athletes, and then on the other side for these college coaches that are really looking to make improvements to their program and recruit the right girls for their program. It's about efficiency and matching these student athletes up with these high academic college coaches. Yeah, and then head first, it's not just you as another number. It's you actually getting that quality. To the next slide, which leads us right into some of those schools that I was talking about. At Head First, you are going to find that great variety. The one thing that they all have in common is one is really better than the next academically. But they're going to be very different from one another, which I think is really, really important as you go through this. So let's take our 2 schools, for example. They're both on the list here, but you have Amherst and GW, right? Very, very different. One is, up there, out in the woods. Ours is right in the middle of the city. We can, again, for the right fit, it works out. But again, one's a larger school, the other one is not so large. One's Division I, one's Division III. You're studying different things. They offer different things. That's what's important. And you may not know necessarily. Well, I know that I want to go to these types of, this particular school or that particular school. But being able to go and see schools that fit in the realm of where you are is important, again, to open that umbrella to be able to do it. Yeah, and I think that this is obviously a partial list of the schools that do come, but even within here, you start to see this idea of the discovery platform and kind of these quote-unquote look-alike schools as well. If you're interested in Amherst, Bates, and Bowdoin, guess what? You also should probably take a look at Haverford and Kenyon. They offer, or Wesleyan and WashU, like they offer some of the same types of experiences as you think about it, just in different geographies or with a STEM focus instead of a humanities focus, or whatever the case may be. Next up, we're going to cover some mistakes and traps within coach communication. And first off is demonstrating and receiving interest from college coaches. And the first one is demonstrate interest, right? I think that there's a key mistake that we see student athletes make is they assume that college coaches know that they're interested. They say, well, of course Lacey Wood knows I'm interested. It's Harvard, everybody's interested. But exactly, everybody's interested. So how are you going to stand out? How do you know, how do you make them know that you are interested in their program so that they can actively recruit you? It is really dangerous, and this is a key mistake. It's really dangerous to assume that college coaches know that you're interested in their program, rather than make it clear to them. Make it 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt clear, and we'll talk about how in a second. Piece of this is that coaches want to recruit student athletes who are the right fit for and are also interested in their program, right? They want to be wanted. They want to have players invest time in researching their program and showing interest to their program. That signifies interest, because coaches don't want to waste their recruiting resources or their time going after players who they think they like, but who don't necessarily show some interest in their program. They don't want to waste, turn their wheels recruiting this player who's looking at a completely different set of schools. They want efficiency. They want to save time and resources. So they're looking for student athletes that they think can return on their investment of time and recruiting resources. They also show, it shows a lot of initiative to be able to do that, because these programs are not very large. So when they go and they want to find
a specific player, they want to make sure that that player is going to add a ton of value, yes, to their team, but more importantly to their university. And they represent their university well. And right from the get-go, even as a freshman, being able to go up and say, you know, I really enjoyed watching you guys this past season from X, Y, and Z. Or do you have anybody that's interested in or that's studying biology on your team? Because that's something I want to be interested, or that I'm interested in and want to potentially study, are really, really important to do.
Absolutely. And so next question obviously is, okay, how do I show this interest to my target schools? How do I demonstrate this interest? And first is you need to, quote unquote, recruit these programs that you're interested in as much or if not more than they're recruiting you. So you need to reach out to them as much or more than they are reaching out to you. You need to demonstrate interest in them as much or more than they are demonstrating interest in you. And then another key part here is maintain an effective level of proactive communication with the college coaches at your target schools, and also mix up how you reach out to them. You know, don't just email them, don't just call them. Mix in a phone call, mix in an email, throw them a handwritten note, shoot them a text, engage with the program on social media. I think that's one that kind of goes under leveraged is, you know, give the Pomona Pitzer softball has one of the best Instagrams and Twitter accounts that I've ever seen. Follow them, engage with their program.
Middlebury's is pretty good.
Middlebury's is great. Give them a retweet, give them a like, comment on their post, follow their story, whatever the case may be. I think that doing things like this show interest and also help coaches see you as somebody that stands out in the process by showing this interest and by showing this genuine interest in their program and kind of what's going on there.
You know, and I think, and you know, we will touch on this a little bit later, but I think also this is where mom and dad can really actually come into play here. It's got to all come from the kids, right? Because as much as a coach wants to hear from you, and they will, but not yet, they're recruiting the student athlete. Make sure that when they are sending stuff out, you're taking a look at what that says. Make sure that they're sending stuff that makes sense. Make sure that if they are on social media and they are following some of these things, that if they're getting a follow back, or if, you know, a coach may look at it, that your social media is cleaned up. These are small things that a parent can really engage in. And again, we touch a lot about this, you know, upon this at camp, which I think is really, really important through the process.
Absolutely. And so when it comes to coach communication, you know, we're saying you have to communicate with coaches. Great. How do you do that? How do you go about that? We think about it in terms of the 3 Ps of coach communication. 1, be proactive. Proactivity has already come up a lot in this, I feel, and it's not going to stop coming up. It's going to keep coming up because it's a really, really crucial part of this recruiting process. Be proactive. Reach out first. Reach out before camp. Reach out before the tournament that you might see a coach at, and just drop them a note and say, "Hey, coach, I'm really interested in Pomona. I'd love to, you know, I'm excited to see you at camp, Coach Figueroa," whatever the case may be. Next is be persistent, but don't pester. The way that I think about this is kind of best practice. Always have a reason to reach out. Don't just decide that you're going to email Coach Bevere from Middlebury every Tuesday just because it's a Tuesday. Have a reason, whether it's, hey, here are my updated SAT or ACT scores. Here's my latest transcript with SAT scores. Here's my latest recruiting video. Here's my latest travel ball schedule, whatever the case is. If you have a reason and you are reaching out thoughtfully and respectfully, you are not pestering them, but you are demonstrating proactivity and you are demonstrating your persistence, which shows interest and keeps you on their radar, and also, by the way, keeps them informed of your updated SAT scores and your updated video.
Exactly right.
And the last part is personalize every touch point. This is one that it kind of seems self-evident, but we hear so much from college coaches that they get an email that's addressed to the wrong program or addressed to the wrong coach, or it says, "Hey, you know, dear Coach Johnson from Amherst, I'm really excited to major in aeronautical engineering." Great. That sounds like that email is meant for a school that has aeronautical engineering probably. So the way that I think about this is not just the negative side of it of you know, making mistakes in this, but the way that you personalize your message can help you stand out as well. I say include 3 to 5 unique facts in each touch point, in each email. Say, I'm really interested in Amherst because of 1, where it is, 2, the majors they offer, 3, I saw how you guys did in the NESCAC this year, whatever the case is. Have 3 to 5 unique points that personalize each outreach for why you are interested in their school. And this really helps show that you're taking your time, you're being thoughtful, you're being proactive, and you are actually invested and interested in their college program. Then we talk a little bit more about kind of proactive coach communication. Again, we said mix it up, use more than just email, have a reason. And then also one thing that we see a lot of student athletes use very effectively is use and leverage the digital platforms that are available to you. Create an NCSA profile and have that be your landing page as a student athlete, and include that rather than sending, the 5th attachment with your transcript. They'll need to see that eventually, but if you can put this all in one place and make it really easy for coaches to digest, that makes it pretty easy. It
makes it easier for you to be able to send out, because 20 bullet points on every little thing, you can throw some of that stuff in your NCAA profile and just be able to look at that. And coaches are on these platforms, and that's what they're used to reading, opposed to 3-page emails.
Absolutely. And then the other side of this, and this is one that I think sometimes goes undermentioned as well, is reactive coach communication. This goes hand in hand with keeping an open mind. Respond thoughtfully, completely, respectfully, personably to every email that you get from a college coach. There's a difference between kind of these mass camp invites versus a personal touch point, but when you get a personal touch point, respond to it, and do your homework first. Look into this school. As Matt and I said, you might be really interested in NESCAC schools. You get an email from Coach Ferguson at Pomona, and you're like, Pomona Pitzer, who are the Sage Hens? What is this? Who is this program at Claremont, California? I have no idea about. But if you just blow them off, that's a door that you just closed, right? And then you do a little bit more research. You're like, oh man, Pomona really would have been a great fit, but I already closed that door. So as you get this coach communication, keep as many doors possible open as you can as you progress through this, because you never know what might be a fit, as long as you are keeping an open mind and assessing schools through this holistic list.
And coaches also, as we see from year after year, it's a very small community as well, especially in the academic space. So coaches are going to go from maybe one school to another, they speak. You always want to be that student athlete that's positive, that always has a great attitude. There's the little things. We talk about this at camp, I know that Brendan certainly does, where you never know when a coach is watching or hears from somebody else. And if you do it consistently, email after email, pitch after pitch, swing after swing, your hustle on the field, all these things really combined, that can actually get you recruited in these situations as well.
Absolutely. And I think going back to that student athlete you mentioned who's going to be playing in the Big East soon, this is such a big part of what she did to stand out as well, was being really thoughtful in not just the coaches that she was interested in, the program she was interested in, but with everybody. She was just a ball of energy. She was delivering energy. She was hand delivering energy to every coach and every player at camp through email, in person, everything. And that really, it got to a point where college coaches were saying, look, I don't think she's the right fit for my program, but you should be recruiting her. And that ended up working for her. It was recommendation from coach to coach to coach because of her positivity and because she approached every interaction with a college coach in that way. The next thing there you see is NCAA recruiting timeline misconceptions. And this is one that has some kind of recent turmoil behind it, let's say, or some recent legislation behind it, which is there were changes recently to the NCAA college recruiting calendar. And they've kind of changed some of the conceptions about direct coach communication and everything else. And so the misconception is that for the class of 2021 and younger, so rising juniors and current sophomores and younger, they say, I can't talk to college coaches at all until September 1st of my junior year. And then another thing that we hear a lot because of this is, therefore, there's no point in me showcasing for college coaches until fall of my junior year so that I can talk to them. This is a misconception. We've certainly been in this high academic recruiting space before and after this legislation, and have put a lot of work and research and thought and writing into this. But the realities of the NCAA recruiting, parts of the NCAA recruiting calendar certainly did change. We don't want to undersell that. The class of 2020, rising seniors, are fully eligible to have in-person recruiting specific conversations directly with college coaches from now until they're committed, till they sign their NLI or admitted to a school, whatever the case may be. After September 1st of your junior year, you can have any conversation you wish with a college coach. The change came for those student athletes that are on the other side of September 1st of their junior year. So the class of 2021 and younger in this year. They cannot have these quote unquote recruiting specific conversations with college coaches, but they can have direct contact and face-to-face conversations with coaches at honor roll, as long as these conversations are not recruiting specific in their nature. Now, this is where kind of some of the gray area comes in, and some of the issues of kind of interpretation. Different schools, different compliance offices, different coaches have different interpretations of what recruiting specific means. But the basic of it, the short and quick of it, is that you cannot talk with a college coach about your specific admission or your specific scholarship and opportunities at that softball program. That's a pretty limited window in terms of what you cannot talk about. It leaves open a whole host of other conversations that you are able to have to advance your recruiting. And one thing that we do a lot at camp is, how do you make these introductions? How do you kind of segue into some of these conversations?
We've been running high academic camps for 21 years, right? What I've heard and what I have found is, at least from the 5 years I've been doing this in the countless camps, because I was here before and after, and hearing it from Brennan, who started this, is that nothing has really changed very much for the underclassmen. At a high academic school, they're not going to make an offer to you, right, at that age. That's the whole point of why these things exist. This is not a 7th grader getting an offer to a school. That never really happened. This doesn't happen in the academic school. So the point of this is that college coaches really need to get to know you and really need to have you on the radar, and that's what this does. So the rules specifically aren't going to have much of an effect. But if I told you that, yeah, most of the schools that come to our events, the first time they ever saw these kids were as rising seniors, it's not necessarily the case, and it makes it a whole heck of a lot easier for these kids that do come a little bit younger.
Absolutely. And which kind of loops us right into our last point, which is the last mistake that we see student athletes make, which is regarding kind of recruiting outcomes and timelines, and really some misconceptions, misperceptions about the timing of high academic recruiting in particular.
For sure. So, as we talked about before, for a 2020, coming to camp, the idea of, hey, listen, it's just too late for me. That's not the case at all. At all. I think you have to be realistic with the types of schools that you're looking at. You want to make sure that you're getting out there because you have the ACTs, the SATs, the full transcript, and a lot of these decisions don't get made until the end of that summer, into that early fall, when that early decision period comes around in November. Those are the types of things that you want to make sure that you're finding. Whereas for 2021s and younger, yes, you're not going to make a commitment at camp, but that wasn't happening 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. What you want to make sure that you're doing is you're going out there and you're getting in front of these coaches. They know who you are. They have a track record to be able to follow you through. And you're up on a board somewhere saying, let's see how these things pan out. So you can take those last few puzzle pieces when you are September 1 of your junior year, and you can plug those in and you can say, I'm ready to make my commitment to X school.
Absolutely. I think that kind of in this, if you kind of, and because student athletes and parents are coming at this from their own grad year, I think that it's natural to kind of miss both halves of this. But once you put both halves together, it's really clear kind of where this disconnect lies, which is, if I'm saying that it's too late to be recruited as a rising senior, or that there aren't opportunities for me, but that I can't be recruited yet as a rising junior, you're like, okay, then
where's the sweet spot?
Right, when are people getting recruited?
Yeah.
And I think that especially for underclassmen, coaches are picking up the phone on September 1st, the day that they are eligible to have these recruiting specific conversations with rising juniors, they are picking up the phone and they are calling girls that are on their recruiting list. That does not mean that on September 1st, they watch a kid play, they meet her, they decide she's the right fit for the program, they call her and they commit her. That is not all happening on September 1st. That is happening in the lead up. That is happening in the lead up to September 1st. Sure. And then they're finalizing some of these recruiting specific pieces at that time once they can. But this exposure piece is so crucial that it happens earlier. And this is where we come to kind of the realities of the timing for high academic softball recruiting. The tricky part is, and we kind of get different questions about this, but there is no single timeline for all the programs that come to our camps. Different programs will be at different stages in 2019 than they will be in 2020. They'll be recruiting different classes in different ways. Their positional needs will be different. the way that their previous year's recruiting class shook out and who they got in, who they lost to a rival program, is going to change how they handle things year over year, and it's going to vary by division, by league, and everything in between as well. So the reality for the class of 2020 is that there are a lot of opportunities for 2020s at high academic schools through the summer and even through the fall because of something that we refer to internally as kind of the high academic slowdown. As Matt alluded to, these college programs need to not just know that you can hit the ball, they also need to know that you have the right transcript, you have the right SAT scores, you have the right character to fit the program that Lacey Wood at Harvard is building. So they need to see a more complete transcript. They need to see the second round of SATs. So they're not recruiting girls who are in 9th and 10th grade anyway. And so what this is really doing is this is bringing a lot of the Division I programs more in line with what we were already seeing, which is a lot of opportunities for rising seniors. For the class of 2021 and younger, as Matt mentioned, this is the perfect time to really get ahead of the process and put yourself in the driver's seat. What this does is it gets you on these coaches' radars and it lets them follow your development year over year. They are recruiting not just who you are as a player right now, they're recruiting who you're going to be in their program in 2 years, in 4 years, in 5 years in some cases, and beyond, and who you are as an alumni contributing and coming back for their alumni reunion. They're thinking about all these different things. And so the ability that they have to track your development over time gives them more and more data points to project out your performance on the field as you progress, right? And that is a key thing that they are looking for. And so if they can follow you, they get to see that development, which gives them more opportunities to get to know you and really have trust and have faith in the judgment that they've made and that you will continue to develop within their program as well. And next up, we're going to cover very explicitly like the questions that we get at camp, Matt.
I think these are really, really important, especially as we kind of come down the home stretch here. So a lot of what we're hearing is, what, on the phone before camp, what grad year are these coaches recruiting? Like, is that really specific? Or when should I come to camp? When's the best time to get recruited? These are actually really, really good questions, but it's very, very different based upon the program, who you are for you. So I think that's one of the things. You have to make sure that the opportunity is going to be right for you and for you as a student athlete. So college coaches are recruiting all the grad years, right, at each of the camps, but they are doing it in different ways, as I was saying before. You're going to have college coaches that are starting to say, man, like this kid can really play. I can't wait to see them develop. We had that last year with a Division III school. That coach, she was amazing to say like how amazing these younger players were versus some of these older players, and she's really excited to see them as they progress. But you need to come to camp, like I said, when you're ready to do so. And, there's going to be opportunities for you as a rising freshman, as a rising sophomore, certainly as you get older. And you want to just put yourself in a position that, as you said before, when you are ready to make that decision, more importantly, that a coach is saying, hey, I've seen all I need to see on this particular player, but at the same time, that I've seen everything that I need to know about the coach, about the program, and about the school. So when that time comes, it's the perfect fit because it's a big decision.
Absolutely. And to kind of to highlight some of our alumni, because we're really proud of what our alumni have done, and also to kind of give some credence to this idea that opportunities exist all along this timeline. What you see here on your screen are just 8 of the 171 alumni that are on 50-plus college rosters in the year of 2019. So with the season that is still ongoing for those fortunate programs and for the one that has just ended for a lot of other programs, 171 of our alumni were on rosters at high academic schools. And when you look at this, when we think about Jameson's journey to Duke, or Miranda's to Cornell, or Sarah's to Middlebury, they each looked different from each other, including the timeline of when things happened. Some of these girls that you see on your screen committed before the NCAA calendar change. They recruited before they were rising juniors at camp. They committed after, in the fall of their senior year, right before the admissions, the early admissions deadline, or in some cases the regular decision deadline. So these players that you see here have really demonstrated the variety and the reality of the timeline for opportunities that exist at these high academic programs as well.
as well as the variety in the schools. I mean, we really look, yes, at these cards here, but also on the right-hand side, there are even more schools where you're going to have some big-time Power 5 schools in there, but certainly some of the smaller ones as well, all from that high academic background there.
Certainly. And that wraps up kind of what we have scheduled for the evening, but we do want to take really as long as families need for any questions that you have. So to send a question, you can find the questions tab in the GoToWebinar toolbar. Just type it in there, press send, and then we're gonna respond to some of these questions now. If we don't now, we'll certainly get back to you and be in touch with you individually as well. The first one that came in, and this isn't necessarily a dedicated question, but it's certainly a thought that we believe and kind of something that I know is on a lot of people's minds. This is a really overwhelming process, Matt. Like there's so many different parts of this to consider. Like when a family is confronted with how overwhelming this can be, what do you generally say to a student athlete or to a family, Matt?
Well, I think a lot of what we talked about in this can be very, very, very helpful for that. I think the first thing is take a deep breath. I think that there's going to be a fit for your student athlete somewhere. I think it is exactly that, being able to start with a list of schools that you think that you may be interested in terms of some of those buckets that we talked about. Go to a camp like, whether it be a Head First or something like that, that's going to provide you with amazing exposure to a number of different schools. I also think this is something we haven't really talked about, but dig into your high school or your friend network in terms of where they're going, right? Some of their older friends or your friends' kids that are now freshmen, sophomores in colleges, and be able to pick the brain of kind of where they are. Those are a few things to get started. Also within your own travel ball program. There's some great alumni and great travel ball programs, or the Head First alumni network. Being able to tap into some of those are really important to connect with folks. And at camp specifically, what I think is really important about Head First is we actually bring out our own team to run the event. And a lot of those folks either are current or former D1 or D3 high academic ball players that spend a lot of time in those 2 days with those kids. And I think that's what's really important, is making those connections.
Absolutely. Next question that came in, and I'm gonna take this one, but feel free to chime in if anything comes up. If you're lucky enough to get a call on September 1st, what is the commitment timeline? What if that school that calls you at 12:01 a.m. on September 1st isn't your dream school? It's not the school that you're holding out for. And I wish that there was a very simple answer to this, but different programs are going to handle this piece of the timeline a little bit differently. Some schools are going to say, this is an exploding offer. You have until X date to get back to me, and then you can give me a call and say that you still want to come here, but that spot that I offered you is not guaranteed. And they do this for a host of reasons. It's for their own recruiting to kind of get those commitments in the door, but it's also out of respect to the other players that are interested in their program too. So that certainly will vary somewhat by the program, but generally, if you've gotten on the radar and coaches and student athletes have agreed that it's a two-way match, it can move pretty quickly after that September 1st, at least to getting to the next step. Now, for some of these high academic programs, they might really like you. They call you on September 1st and they say, we really like you, but you're a high follow, right? You are our top bullet that we have for admissions to Harvard or to Princeton or whatever, but we need to follow your junior year grades. And especially at these high academic schools, that is going to be the case for a lot of these coaches and programs, is they're going to still need to see that your junior year transcript does come in appropriately. Now, if you have 2 solid years of background, you're like, well, I've gotten all A's so far, like it would take a serious derailing for anything to happen, then they're going to feel pretty comfortable about that. But to really formalize this, it might take up until the end of junior year for them to walk your players, your profile, your folder over to admissions and say, this is my top recruit, because they want to be able to hand it the admissions department as complete a transcript and profile as they can.
As well as boards. I mean, those are things that are going to be really, really important, but I think can help you as you say, wow, I'm getting some serious, interest right now. I need to make sure that my ACT score or my SAT scores are where they need to be. And maybe some of that money, instead of going necessarily to different places goes more into the SAT or the ACT tutor. Those are things that can really help shape what your spend as well as your time looks like over the next year, year and a half.
Absolutely. Next question is regarding the video that Matt talked about a little bit at camp. What is the difference between the videos that we take at honor roll camps versus individual skills videos that players may have? And I think that this is a really good question. We talk about this a lot at camp, and we do have a blog post kind of regarding it as well. Those individual showcase videos can be filmed by mom and dad, right? iPhone cameras are incredible, and getting ground ball reps or outfield reps or batting practice reps or you know, a live bullpen can be done with a tripod and an iPhone. What we capture at camp that is different is this idea of verified game footage. Mom and dad, we love you, and I've seen a lot of footage of parents taking video footage during games from behind the chain link, and sometimes that can be very useful, but the difference between that and the video that we have at camp is this idea of verified game footage. It's of a professional, polished quality. iPhone cameras are great. These cameras offer some really, really crisp picture.
Angles as well.
And also multiple angles so that coaches can follow the action. The other thing is, as Matt mentioned, these coaches have notes on both sides of the interaction. If I'm watching some game footage and I don't know who's playing other than the person that mom and dad's trying to highlight in the camera, and I see you strike this girl out, great. That might have been the best player in Southern California, or it might have been somebody who is definitely not recruitable to the program that you're sending this to. So what our footage from camp is able to do is coaches can look at it and look at not just the pitcher, but also the batter. And they watch that batter hit a double in the gap, and they say, oh, that pitcher number 171 was really, really good. I have some really good notes on her. That must be a really good hitter. And so they're able to kind of match up and verify both sides of the interaction. That really tells a story about the quality of that player.
I also think being able to look back not just at some of the pitching notes, but some of the objective measurements. So that kind of brings together the full scale of going to an event like ours, where you're able to see all of these different stats come together, your own notes as well. Because think about how many notes these coaches are taking throughout the summer, and now you're able to take the video, which we're going to get multiple reps, multiple pitches on, and then you're able to relate that back to the stats. Now you can put it all together and put it up on the big screen a month later and then understand what that looks like.
Absolutely. Next question is, how do you go from a quality list to a school list? So we talked about building a school list is the wrong first step. You start with a quality list. How do you take that and translate it into not just I want to go to school in the city, but NYU and GW? Matt?
Yeah, I think from there what you need to do is take a list, and it may start out at 25, start to narrow that down to schools that really hit all those buckets, and all of a sudden it's a little bit of process of elimination. That helps to now get you a qualified school because they've kind of fit or check all the boxes. Another thing is you want to be able to go and take some of those schools that are on that, and I know we talked about limit your travel, but go there and see maybe 2 or 3 of those schools to be able to say, wow, it's everything that I dreamed of. That was my dream school. They checks all the boxes. I went there, I visited. I know someone who goes there, and I was able to see kind of the back end. And now all of a sudden, you can do that with 1, 2, 3 schools, and then others that may be very, very similar because of where they are, the climate, the things like that. And then the softball, again, this is why we're here. That's got to play a role in this. What's the interest like? And then you put those things together, and all of a sudden you go from just a list to what I like to call a qualified list.
Absolutely. And I think that the other thing that's, I mean, as Matt pointed to, research is so crucial here. And what I always tell people, I tell players at camp is use that last interaction. I mean, you're holding a supercomputer in your pocket. So there's no excuse to talk to Jody Gabriel from McAllister and walk away and still not know where McAllister is if you like that interaction with Jody Gabriel, right? So use the resources that you have at hand. For me, it was a dog-eared copy of the Princeton Review, I think, like the 500 top colleges or whatever it was. There are incredible internet resources where you can actually set filters to the different size or different setting or different regions, and kind of start from there. Because if you have an idea, then you can start to build not only the list of schools that fit that you might have already known of, but also that fit these qualities that you can start to look at as well.
And at camp, that's going to help you as well, start to build that out. One quick point when it comes to that is when you're at camp or a tournament and you have a conversation with a coach that you're not necessarily, and even if you are familiar with, take notes. We give you a book at camp. We're going to kind of go through some of that, but have your own notebook so you can write down, because you're not going to remember everything, nor are these coaches. But if you have a few tips or something that somebody told you and you're able to reference that, again, that's a little bit of a pro tip that can certainly help you long term.
Certainly. And then there's next question is kind of two that I'm gonna roll into one, both very kind of similar, which is about balancing athletic and academic life at the next level. You know, how do you find in finding the right fit? How do you find out the coach's views on balancing academics and their play on the field, practice, weight room, and everything else that goes into building a high quality softball program? And then also, what is the academic athletic balance and time management differences, key phrase time management, between Division 1, 2, and 3 programs? And I think that
you should talk specifically about your experience
for sure.
First, and then versus some of the folks here that played at schools like Georgetown.
For sure. And I think that in it absolutely does come down to discipline and time management. And this is a choice. We talk about this a lot at camp, right? You guys as softball players have already made this hard choice. The types of girls that come to our camp are the ones who are, you know, not goofing around on the travel ball trip, but they have their textbook with them. They have their SAT prep book with them. They're the ones who are doing the quote unquote uncool things of studying on the bus, going to the game, doing, you know, polishing off the 5th round of edits on their paper on the bus. So there is a certain level of discipline and time management and self-management that comes into performing on the classroom or in the classroom and on the field at such a high level. But for all of these college programs, and there's a reason that we partner with the college programs that we do, and that's that part of that is that they look at this in much the same way. They have their priorities set as well, right? They're not saying, nope, we're going away for a weekend trip, skip all your classes, blow off all your homework, it doesn't matter what your professor says. They instill this responsibility and they place the ownership of this on their team, on their players to say, hey, if you have to miss class for a road trip, you need to communicate with your professor, you need to get the work done, and if you need to miss X, Y, or Z, they're not going to be super happy, but if you have a lab every Monday, great, maybe that's not the practice that you go to. Or you need to communicate. A key part of this is going to be communicating with your professors if there's anything you need to miss, or with your coaches. If you say, hey, you know, Coach Wood at Harvard, I'm really interested in being in a lab science, and I know that my labs are going to go till 8 p.m. some nights, right? That's a reality of college. It wasn't my reality. I was a philosophy major, but for some people, that's the reality, right? And that's a really important piece. And she's going to say one of two things. She's going to say, A, is there any way that you can load more of your lab classes in the fall so that when we're in season, they have plenty to do with practices and weight room sessions, everything else in the fall too. But once they get in season in the spring, is there anything that you can do to minimize the overlap, minimize the impact of these labs on the practice schedule or on the game schedule? And you're going to say, great, I can schedule as many as I can for the fall. This one class is only offered in the spring. Great. Can you please try to get into the Monday section of that lab? Because on Mondays, we typically have the day off. We play, you know, Friday, Saturday, Sunday in the Ivy League, and then Mondays we have off. You can, if you communicate effectively, you can start to build your schedule around the things that you know you can't miss, classes, games, etc., and then really set yourself up for success that way. And that is so key.
Well, to that point also, we talked about this earlier, is being able to talk with a coach about, hey, what other kids on the team have a similar major? And if you realize that nobody has that major, you need to ask, is this allowed? And I think that to that, you know, the question there is going to be certain schools where you can only have certain majors. Not typically the schools that we see, but I think that's important through this process is don't be fooled by some of these things. Make sure you're going in understanding fully what you need to do, what you're allowed to do, and what's going to be the limitations on that.
Absolutely, and this is where research can play a really key role too. One beautiful part of college rosters, I think, is that you go on there, you see where they're from, so you know where coaches are recruiting. You also see what their majors are. If you have your heart set on majoring in biology or majoring in biochem, God bless you, and you go onto the roster and you're like, well, not a single girl on this team is majoring in biochem or majoring in biology. It might be that just none of those 16 girls are interested in biochem. Very possible.
Mhm.
Also might not be the case too. And so having those frank discussions with the coach and also doing your own research, because that research can tell a story as well. Next thing is kind of geographic diversity. So if you're coming from a Southern California team versus East Coast team, how does that play into kind of your recruiting process? Matt, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, it can go a number of ways. We just talked about looking on the rosters of these schools and seeing where these kids are coming from. That tells you a little bit about where these coaches typically find kids. However, I will say that you're going to typically see a nice variety of where these kids are coming from. And I think it's important where you just make sure, no matter where you are in the country, that you're able to find these coaches. I think that's the key. I also think, and I think we touched upon this earlier, and you have to understand the climate of where you're going as well. Because if you're from the Northeast and you go down south and you realize it can get pretty hot, or if you're from California and you want to go play in Maine, it can be very, very cold. A lot of the times this is what is happening and you adjust and it's okay, but there are going to be differences in what a typical winter looks like. You and I are both from the Boston area. It snows a lot up there. Down here it snows 2 inches. People freak out, but we are used to a certain kind of way because that's how we grew up. It's going to be the other way. So that's one of the things that you just want to make sure geographically that you're in line and that a college coach has the opportunity to see you. I know there's a few other things you want to throw in there. For sure.
And I think that, so one statistic that blew my mind when I read it earlier this year was that 86% of high school kids go to school within 500 miles of where they went to high school. Over 50% go to college within 100 miles of home. So college, to some degree, to a large degree, for a lot of people in this country, is a regional decision. If you look at rosters, some of them start to reflect that. At schools that have this national footprint, at the Harvards, the Williams, the Amherst, the Pomonas, these types of schools, they are recruiting nationally. And in fact, I think that there is a very good way, they can get more easy exposure to players that are in their region. So they do still recruit those girls. Certainly, they're going to recruit New England if they're Williams, because they can go see them at X and Y at travel ball tournament or get them out to their Williams camp, and they're going to have a lot of success in converting those girls and getting them onto their roster. But they also want admissions has to have a student body that reflects the diversity of the country, right? And that means geographic diversity certainly as well. There are some schools that in admissions and in recruiting, there's a story to be told where being from California and applying to a Northeast school, being from Hawaii and applying to a school in Texas can be a huge advantage actually in the recruiting process, because they want to, if a college coach can go to the admissions department and say, hey, here's my recruiting class, by the way, bonus for you, I have a kid who went to high school in American Taipei. Oh my God, like that's a coup for them, because they are able to deliver that geographic diversity to the admissions department and really, really help the admissions department cause as well.
Agree there, and I think it's something, because we can speak about this, from a personal level of being at camp, we see it so much. I mean, the amount of times that an East Coast school will go out west and do very, very well, or an East Coast school will be at a New York event, but have kids come from Texas, Arizona, Hawaii, Japan. It doesn't matter. We see folks from all over the world that'll come in and do very, very well. So again, I think it's about the right fit. It's also exciting for these coaches to be able to go out and meet folks from all different parts of the country and even the world.
Absolutely. One question that I'm gonna take on, it's a little bit more sensitive in kind of this era, but it's a very valid question. It's one that we've been talking a lot about internally, and I don't want to just kind of gloss over it or ignore it. But the college admissions scandal is still fresh in everybody's mind, right? That was the admissions for the class of 2023, the class that just got accepted, the class that all of the stats and metrics are just coming through for. And I think that, the question explicitly is, has that scandal changed the level or impacted the level of SAT, ACT for these programs? And I'll say, first of all, to be perfectly candid, none of our programs, baseball or softball, were at all tied to any of these allegations or anything that's ongoing, which isn't surprising to me or to us, because we partner with the schools and the programs that we work with for a reason, and that's that they're doing things the right way. That being said, we host the Stanford baseball coach. We host the Yale baseball coach. You know, these are schools that were involved writ large. Like these athletic departments were involved. I don't think that it has changed the actual standards for admissions for these coaches, but it has brought more desire for transparency, possibly more scrutiny to these schools and to these programs. But again, that's fine. For the coaches that we partner with, for Harvard softball, for Yale baseball, that is desirable, because all it's going to do is shine a light on how thoughtfully they are going about their recruiting practices and the quality of student athletes that they are bringing in. And I'll also add, to kind of tie into this, is I think that there's, on SAT and ACT, these standardized test scores, it kind of goes one of two directions. There's a perception that, well, it doesn't tell a story about me as a student athlete, or that it's the be all end all. And I think that for most colleges, it's somewhere in between. For college coaches, they tend to look to SAT or ACT scores because it gives them the clearest barometer and the clearest metric that they can look at a kid and say, here is where you stack against the other recruiting class is with your SAT or ACT score. GPAs and course loads and everything else will play a much bigger role in admissions and certainly later on in your recruiting process, but those are a more complex story to tell. Your teacher recommendations are a more complex story to tell that give much more insight into you as a student athlete. You are so much more as a student athlete than this, you know, number out of 1600 or out of 36 that's printed on a piece of white paper in black ink. That's not who you are as a student athlete, but it gives a very clear first level of assessment for college coaches as they're looking to their recruiting class as well.
One quick thing to add, because I think there's a lot, we could probably spend 2 hours talking about this. However, what I think we realize is the importance that sports do play in this role, especially with the higher academic schools. I will say that being able to have a competitive edge is really, really, really important. Sports has been able to do that, as you can see from this. But at the same time, with programs that don't have a track record of doing this stuff, which again, you said are the programs that we work with, this actually shows if you can place all these different things together, that does give you a leg up in this process, more so than it would if you were coming in without it. And that is not going to change because of the quality of these programs and the way that they vet their players, however you want to call it. So for us, kind of long story short, or long answer short, is it hasn't affected us. It is something that I think is important, that shines a light on something that's pretty horrific that happened. And at the same time, understanding that, having that is, that competitive edge is very, very important.
Absolutely. And I think that, I was just looking at the numbers for some of these hyper-competitive college admissions today. And, Harvard acceptance rate is under 5.5%. Yale, Princeton, these schools are under 6% for admissions. It's a very competitive, and this is virtually every year since 1999, the number of applicants to each of these high academic schools has gone up, and it hasn't stopped going up year over year. Every year it sets a new high water mark and a new record. And consequently, the admissions rate is going down and down and down and down and getting more and more competitive. So having a tool like softball in conjunction with this great academic transcript and a great test score and great teacher recommendations and just being the right type of character for a school and for a program is exactly the quote unquote hook or the push that some of these applicants and applications need. And so while this is a more fraught and more difficult process while you are going through it, and there's many more things to consider if you're putting softball side by side with competitive academics, it also can deliver some hugely tremendous value to student athletes and also obviously to college coaches and to colleges who are pursuing this as well.
That's not going to change.
No. That brings us to the end of the last question that we had. Now, I will say that was by no means the last chance that you have to have your questions answered. You see there on the screen our email, our phone number. Feel free to check out our blog. We have a live chat on our website, so if you have any questions, feel free to ping us there. thank you so much for taking the time this evening. We really appreciate it. And if you have any questions at all, we'll be following up with you in the next couple of days, someone from our team, or certainly feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that remain. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening.
Thank you.